Some crimes don't begin with violence. They begin with betrayal.
Behind this quiet home lay a secret that would shock an entire village.
The investigation soon pointed toward the one person nobody expected.
She spent her life protecting her family until trust became her greatest mistake.
This is the Mahawala Vasant Murder, a true story of greed, betrayal, and a family torn apart.
Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, The Silent Witness. Here, we share crime stories, mysteries, and haunting real-life cases.
If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss the next part of these stories or our upcoming new videos.
Mahawala Vasant was the kind of village where people believed nothing truly terrible could happen. Every morning began with the sound of birds, farmers walking toward their fields, and families preparing for another ordinary day. It was a community built on trust, where every face was familiar and every home carried generations of memories. But hidden behind the peaceful silence of one modest house, a storm had been growing for years. Before this village understood what had happened, it would become the center of a murder investigation that would shock an entire nation. For more than a decade, Yalava had lived alone after losing her husband, protecting the small home and farmland they had spent a lifetime building together. Every morning followed the same quiet routine. She watered her flowers, cared for the property, and believed that discipline could overcome almost any hardship. Her greatest hope was not wealth or comfort. It was seeing her only son rebuild his life before the mistakes of his past became impossible to escape. While Yalava fought every day to preserve her family's future, Arjun was quietly losing control of his own. Failed business ideas, risky investments, and borrowed money had trapped him inside a cycle he could no longer escape. Every unpaid loan brought another threatening phone call. Every promise he made became another lie he struggled to maintain. Instead of searching for responsibility, his thoughts slowly turned toward the one thing he believed could solve every problem, the land his mother refused to sell. Every number inside Yalava's notebooks represented years of sacrifice. She carefully recorded every expense, every harvest, and every rupee she earned because she understood how difficult it had been to build this life. She refused every suggestion to sell the family farmland, believing that temporary financial problems should never destroy a lifetime of hard work. She never realized that the very decision she believed would protect her family's future was quietly becoming the reason someone else believed he had nothing left to lose. As the pressure mounted, Arjun spent more time alone than ever before. Creditors called repeatedly, demanding repayment for debts that had grown far beyond his ability to manage. Standing beside the fields his father had once cultivated with pride, he no longer saw memories or family history. He saw money. He saw escape. And with every passing day, the distance between desperation and disaster grew smaller. Somewhere beneath the gathering storm clouds, a dangerous idea was beginning to feel like the only answer. The arguments inside the house became more frequent with every passing week. What had once been quiet disagreements over money slowly transformed into bitter conflicts about responsibility, inheritance, and the future of the family property. Yalava remained determined to protect the land her husband had built through decades of sacrifice, while Arjun became convinced that selling it was the only way to escape the debts closing in around him. Neither of them realized these conversations were becoming the final chapters of a relationship that had once been built entirely on trust. Without telling anyone, Yalava visited the district bank to secure her savings and review legal documents connected to the family property. She wanted everything organized and protected for the future. To her, it was simply responsible planning. But investigators would later discover that this quiet visit unintentionally changed the direction of the entire case. The paperwork confirmed one important fact: Arjun had no legal authority to sell the farmland he had already promised to others. Sleep became almost impossible. Every vibration from his phone meant another reminder of the life he could no longer control. Missed payments had turned into constant threats, and every creditor expected immediate answers. The pressure was no longer financial alone. It had become deeply personal. Arjun began believing that every problem in his life pointed toward one solution. The family land was no longer simply property in his mind. It had become the escape he desperately convinced himself he deserved. Standing outside the house in complete silence, Arjun watched the rain slowly cover the courtyard where he had spent his childhood. The memories surrounding him should have reminded him of family, sacrifice, and home. Instead, every glance toward the property reminded him of unpaid loans and broken promises. Somewhere between memory and desperation, his judgment began to disappear. The storm gathering above Mahawala Vasant was no longer the only storm approaching. Night settled quietly over Mahawala Vasant. The village slept peacefully, unaware that history was about to change forever. Behind the walls of one ordinary house, years of financial failure, hidden resentment, and silent desperation had reached a breaking point. No neighbors heard cries for help. No alarms shattered the darkness. Only the sound of rain echoed across the empty streets as an irreversible decision was made. By sunrise, a loving mother's home would become an active crime scene, and an entire village would struggle to understand how trust had turned into betrayal. Sunrise revealed a scene that no one in Mahawala Vasant believed they would ever witness. Police vehicles blocked the narrow village road while yellow crime scene tape surrounded the modest house that had always appeared so ordinary. Curious villagers gathered silently behind temporary barricades, whispering theories that changed every few minutes. Some believed thieves had entered during the night, while others suspected a long-forgotten land dispute. Inside the property, however, experienced investigators quickly reached a different conclusion. Nothing suggested a robbery. Valuable jewelry remained untouched, cash had not disappeared, and there were no signs of forced entry anywhere around the house. Every observation pointed toward one disturbing possibility: the victim had almost certainly known the person responsible. As forensic photographers documented every corner of the home, Inspector Ravi Sharma understood this investigation was unlike anything the village had ever experienced. The answers were somewhere inside that quiet house, hidden among tiny details that most people would never notice. Inside the house, every object became potential evidence. Dr. Meera Kapoor directed the forensic examination with extraordinary precision, ensuring that nothing was disturbed before being photographed, measured, and documented. Tiny blood droplets, barely visible to the naked eye, revealed that the struggle had moved from one room toward the hallway. Fingerprint powder exposed dozens of impressions across doors, furniture, and household objects. Most belonged to the family, but investigators carefully preserved every print for laboratory comparison. The absence of forced entry continued to dominate the investigation. Doors remained intact, windows had not been damaged, and no valuable property appeared to be missing. Experienced detectives knew these details rarely pointed toward strangers. Instead, they often suggested betrayal by someone trusted enough to enter the home without resistance. Inspector Sharma quietly reviewed the scene once more, realizing that the greatest challenge would not be identifying evidence, it would be proving what that evidence truly meant before assumptions overtook facts. The laboratory became the place where emotion gave way to science. Every sample collected from the house was examined under controlled conditions, allowing investigators to reconstruct the final moments with remarkable accuracy. The medical examiner confirmed that Yalava had attempted to defend herself, and the injuries on her hand suggested a desperate struggle against someone she likely recognized. DNA samples, microscopic fibers, and latent fingerprints were processed alongside blood pattern analysis recovered from the home. None of the findings alone solved the case, but together they began forming a timeline that contradicted several early assumptions. Inspector Ravi Sharma understood that successful homicide investigations are rarely built around dramatic discoveries. Instead, they depend upon hundreds of tiny facts fitting together without contradiction. As laboratory technicians continued their work late into the evening, one recurring question refused to disappear. If no stranger had entered the house, and nothing valuable had been stolen, then who had Yelava trusted enough to allow inside during the final hours of her life? The answer to that question would soon redirect the entire investigation towards someone standing far closer to the victim than anyone had initially imagined. By the third day of the investigation, detectives had interviewed dozens of villagers, relatives, and local business owners. Most conversations revealed the same troubling pattern. Nearly everyone described increasing financial disagreements inside the household during the months leading up to Yelava's death. When Arjun arrived for another formal interview, investigators already possessed far more information than they had during their first meeting. Instead of asking broad questions, they focused on precise details, specific times, exact locations, phone calls, and financial transactions. At first, his timeline appeared confident. But as investigators compared his answers with mobile phone records and witness statements, small inconsistencies quietly began appearing. None of them proved guilt by themselves, yet together they painted the picture of someone struggling to explain every missing minute. Inspector Ravi Sharma remained calm throughout the interview. Years of homicide investigations had taught him that contradictions rarely appear all at once. They emerge slowly, one overlooked detail at a time, until the truth begins separating itself from the story being told. As laboratory reports continued arriving, investigators began assembling every piece of evidence into a single timeline. Mobile phone tower records placed Arjun's device much closer to the family home than he had originally claimed. Banking records revealed mounting financial pressure, with repeated loan repayments, missed deadlines, and transfers that drained his accounts almost as quickly as money entered them. Property documents confirmed another crucial fact. The farmland remained legally controlled by Yelava, making every promise Arjun had given his creditors impossible to fulfill. Standing before the evidence board, Inspector Ravi Sharma no longer viewed the case as a collection of isolated clues. He saw a complete story beginning to emerge. Financial desperation had become resentment, resentment had become obsession. And obsession, investigators believed, had finally crossed the line into violence. Yet despite the growing weight of evidence, the investigation was not finished. Detectives knew that in court, every conclusion would be challenged. The truth had to be stronger than suspicion, stronger than emotion, and supported by facts that could withstand the closest scrutiny. Only then could justice speak for a woman who no longer could. As investigators completed their reconstruction of the case, public attention shifted from the quiet village to the district courthouse. News channels arrived before sunrise, broadcasting live updates as journalists attempted to explain how a peaceful family dispute had evolved into one of the region's most disturbing homicide investigations. Residents of Mahawala Vasant watched the unfolding coverage with disbelief. Many had known Yelava for decades and still struggled to accept that someone from within her own family had become the center of the investigation. Inspector Ravi Sharma remained focused on procedure rather than publicity. Years of experience had taught him that media attention could never replace evidence. Every forensic report, financial document, witness statement, and digital record would soon face careful examination inside the courtroom. The investigation had uncovered a compelling timeline, but only the legal process could determine whether the evidence truly proved what detectives believed had happened inside that quiet home. Inside the courtroom, emotion gave way to facts. Prosecutors carefully presented months of investigative work, beginning with the forensic findings recovered from the crime scene before moving through financial records, mobile phone data, and witness testimony. Rather than relying on a single dramatic piece of evidence, they demonstrated how dozens of independent facts supported one another. The defense challenged every conclusion, questioning timelines, forensic interpretations, and the significance of digital records. The judge listened patiently, reminding both sides that criminal cases must be decided by evidence rather than speculation. Inspector Ravi Sharma watched quietly as the investigation he had led was reconstructed before the court. Every decision made during the inquiry would now be examined under the highest legal standard, where even the smallest detail could influence the final outcome. Among all the forensic reports and technical evidence, one collection of documents carried unusual emotional weight. Yelava's handwritten notebooks told the story of a woman who had spent years protecting her family's future through patience, discipline, and sacrifice. Every carefully written entry reflected a life built on responsibility rather than wealth. Investigators explained how those notebooks, together with banking records and legal property documents, established the growing financial conflict inside the household. They were more than financial records, they became a silent witness to the gradual breakdown of trust between a mother determined to preserve her husband's legacy and a son overwhelmed by debt. As the courtroom examined each page, the case no longer appeared to be only about money or land. It became a story about how years of hidden desperation can slowly destroy the very relationships they are meant to protect, leaving behind consequences that no inheritance could ever repair. After weeks of testimony, forensic analysis, financial evidence, and detailed legal arguments, the courtroom reached its most important moment. Every person inside the room understood that the verdict would not simply determine criminal responsibility, it would define how the tragic events inside Yelava's home would be remembered forever. The prosecution argued that months of financial desperation had created a motive supported by forensic findings, digital evidence, and witness testimony. The defense continued challenging the interpretation of that evidence, insisting that suspicion alone could never replace proof beyond a reasonable doubt. As silence filled the courtroom, Justice Anil Deshmukh reviewed every report, every photograph, and every statement once again before preparing to announce the court's decision. Outside, journalists waited for the outcome, while the people of Mahawala Vasant hoped that, whatever the verdict, the truth would finally bring an end to months of uncertainty. Months after the investigation ended, silence once again settled over Mahawala Vasant. The police tape had disappeared, the media vans were gone, and the crowds that once gathered outside the house had long since returned to their ordinary lives. Yet the home itself had changed forever. The flowers Yelava once watered every morning slowly withered beneath the same neem tree that had witnessed decades of family memories. Dust collected across the empty courtyard, and the front gate remained locked. For neighbors, the house became more than an abandoned property. It became a reminder that the greatest dangers are not always strangers hiding in darkness. Sometimes they grow quietly inside ordinary homes, hidden beneath years of unresolved conflict, financial pressure, and silent emotional collapse. Although the legal process had reached its conclusion, the emotional wounds left behind could never be measured by court documents or forensic reports. Friends and neighbors remembered Yelava not for the violence that ended her life, but for the quiet strength she had shown throughout it. She had worked tirelessly to protect the home her husband built and never stopped believing that her son could change. Her story became a lasting lesson throughout the village, a reminder that love without honesty cannot heal financial desperation, and that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to restore. Long after the headlines disappeared, it was Yelava's kindness, resilience, and determination that remained in the hearts of those who had known her best. Time continued moving forward, just as it always does. Crops were planted, harvested, and planted once again. Children who had once whispered about the investigation eventually grew older, while newcomers to the village knew the story only through those who had lived through it. Yet the old house remained a silent reminder of everything that had happened there. Nature slowly reclaimed the empty courtyard, but memories refused to disappear as easily. Investigators often say that crime scenes eventually become ordinary places again, yet the people connected to them never truly return to ordinary lives. Mahawala Vasant recovered its peaceful rhythm, but beneath that calm remained a lesson that every resident would remember for years. The tragedy had not begun with violence. It had begun much earlier, with ignored warning signs, financial pressure, broken trust, and silence where difficult conversations should have taken place. Long before the investigation started, the real damage had already been unfolding behind closed doors. The investigation eventually became part of advanced homicide training for new detectives. It was studied not because it involved complex technology or dramatic forensic breakthroughs, but because it demonstrated how ordinary details can reveal extraordinary truths. Inspector Ravi Sharma reminded young investigators that successful homicide cases are rarely solved through a single dramatic discovery. Instead, they are solved through patience, careful documentation, and the willingness to question every assumption. A fingerprint, a financial record, a handwritten notebook, a mobile phone location, or a witness recalling a forgotten detail, each may seem insignificant on its own. Together, however, they can reconstruct the final hours of a person's life with remarkable accuracy. The greatest lesson from the case was simple. Evidence speaks quietly. It is the investigator's responsibility to listen carefully before reaching conclusions. When investigators finally packed away the last pieces of evidence, one object remained impossible to forget. It was not an expensive possession or an important legal document. It was Yolava's handwritten notebook. Every carefully written page reflected discipline, honesty, and years of sacrifice. There were no hidden fortunes recorded inside those pages, only the ordinary expenses of an ordinary life. Yet those simple entries became one of the strongest reminders of who she truly was. They revealed a mother trying to preserve stability while quietly carrying the burden of worrying about her son's future. In the end, those notebooks became more than financial records. They became the voice she no longer had, silently telling investigators the story of a family whose greatest struggle had never been about land alone. It had always been about responsibility, trust, and the choices people make when pressure becomes greater than reason. Every true crime investigation leaves behind two stories. The first is written inside police reports, forensic files, and courtroom records. The second is carried silently by the people whose lives were forever changed. In Mahawala Vasant, justice eventually reached its conclusion through evidence, patience, and the careful work of investigators determined to uncover the truth. But no verdict could restore the life that had been lost or erase the pain left behind. The greatest tragedy was never the land, the money, or the inheritance. It was the destruction of trust inside a family that once believed it would always protect one another. Greed promised a future that never existed. Desperation replaced gratitude. And one irreversible decision destroyed everything a lifetime of sacrifice had built. As the sun disappeared beyond the fields and darkness slowly returned to the village, one lesson remained clearer than ever. Wealth can be earned again. Property can change hands. But once love is replaced by betrayal, no amount of money can ever rebuild what has been lost. This case reminds us that the strongest foundation of any family is not wealth, it is trust. Once trust is broken, even justice arrives too late. Every crime leaves behind more than evidence. It leaves unanswered questions, broken families, and lives forever changed. While justice may eventually reveal the truth, it can never erase the choices that created the tragedy. Cases like this remind us that greed grows quietly, betrayal often hides behind familiar faces, and sometimes the greatest danger is found inside the place we call home. Thank you for watching The Silent Witness. If you enjoy carefully researched true crime documentaries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories every week.